Alright, in my previous videos I talked about the National Conference, and today I'm going to start talking about the Century Conference in the exact same order: the Century East, the Century Central, the Century South, and the Century West. So today I'm going to start off with the Century East, consisting of the Pittsburgh Blitz, the Baltimore Charm, the Buffalo Sabres, the Cincinnati Colts, and the Columbus Barons. So we get things started with the Columbus Barons, one of the two teams that went 2-16 this year. Oh boy, what a train wreck they were. First, they start off 0-5. And those first 3 games of the year, they were looking horrible. But then that fifth loss, which was Monday night at the Las Vegas Gamblers, something really strange happened. Alfred Hendrick, who is their quarterback for the entire year, who looked really bad at the very beginning of the year, all of a sudden put up the first, I think it was the very first perfect game when they were at Las Vegas. 21-25 for almost 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. He had a very good game, and he followed up next week with them not just beating, but destroying the Jacksonville Bucks 30-10. However, even though he had very good performances pretty much for the rest of the year, they only were able to win one more game, including finishing the year on a 7-game losing streak, which I think is the second longest current streak going into next season, right behind Detroit. Stat-wise, They were third to last in scoring. They scored an average of 15.4 points a game. They were 37th in yards. Damn, that's really bad. But they were the worst. The very worst rushing offense in the league. They averaged 90.3 yards a game on the ground. That is atrocious. But they were 24th in passing, so they were the top second half in the league in terms of passing. So that's probably their only highlight there. But on defense, oh god, terrible everywhere. They allowed the third most points in the league, allowing over 27 points a game. They had the worst defense in yards. They allowed an average of 402 yards a game. They had the third worst rush defense in the league, allowing almost 150 yards a game. They had the 34th pass defense in the league, allowing over 255 yards a game. So this offense isn't really good except for passing, and that defense is just all across the board bad. And the one player on this team everyone's paying a close eye to is Alfred Hendrick, their quarterback, who has been pretty inconsistent pretty much for the entire year. He had almost 4,000 yards. He had a completion percentage of over 61%, 27 touchdowns, 14 picks for a QB rate of slightly under 90. So he did have a really good year, but if he's going to be the future of this team, he needs to do better next year. And right behind is the running game with their lead runner, Matthew Watson, who's their second round pick, so he was the second highest player they ever picked. Didn't even get 1,000 yards, and he started all 18 games, and he didn't even get 1,000 yards. That's really bad. And he only got 2 touchdowns. So yeah, that running game is atrocious. But apparently they got 2 studs at receiving, with Salvatore Nixon getting almost 1,400 yards and 5 touchdowns, although he missed 1 game due to injury. And right behind him was German McNair, who got over 1,100 yards and 11 touchdowns, so he had a really good year. They had a pretty solid offensive line. They also had 2 120 tacklers this year, with their linebacker William LaFleur with 133, and their fellow linebacker John Jewell with 120. They had a good amount of sacks with 48, with their leading sacker Tony Mendoza with 12 sacks. But interceptions, oh god, this team only got 12 interceptions, so that's really, really behind everyone else, with Ronald Berrios, their cornerback, leading the team with 4. And there really is no highlights this year that are good. I mean, they did win 2 games. They destroyed the Jacksonville Bucks. That's pretty impressive. And they did pull a come-from-behind victory against Buffalo on Sunday night in Week 12, so that was pretty impressive. But other than that, man, this team is just terrible. I was gonna think about saying the worst team on paper. I don't know about that. I think the Detroit Engines or the Louisville Saints are probably worse. But the Columbus Barons are not that far behind. And remember, this team did blow a huge opportunity to beat the Portland Dragons at one point. That was terrible. So what can this team do right in 2017? Well, they have the second overall pick, and there's a bunch of QBs in this draft, so they could draft a QB. But unlike the Louisville Saints, I think they got someone they can stick with at the moment, Alfred Hedrick. Whether or not he's going to be started, that's up in the air. But I don't think they're going to use their first overall pick on a QB. They need to fix that running back. They need to fix that terrible defense too. So who knows what will happen if they are successful doing that. But in the end, this team has nowhere to go but up. To me, 2-16, there is such thing as regression to the mean. You can only go so low before you finally do some sort of improvement. So I guess we'll see what happens next year. Well, right behind the Columbus Barons is another shitty team, and that's the Cincinnati Colts, who went 5-13 and gonna have the 5th overall pick in this coming draft. So wow, let's see how they started. They started off 0-7, and those first 3 games, they were getting blown out in epic proportion, just like Columbus was. Because remember, my first 3 weeks of the season, I said these 2 teams were the shittiest teams in the league. But then after that, I said that they started to turn around a little bit. But Cincinnati, oh god, no, they didn't. They were still 0-7. They went all the way up down to. They even went through a quarterback change during that time span because the quarterback play was so terrible. Then they managed to beat Columbus, but then they were still at 1-12 and looked like guaranteed to get the number 1 overall pick right behind Tampa and Louisville. But then a strange thing happened. They went 4-1 their final games of the year. 4-1, and they were mostly dominant performances. They were down 10-7 against Seattle at one point. But then they went on to score 20 unanswered points to win 27-10. They destroyed Honolulu. They decimated Tampa. And they beat Columbus on the final Monday night game of the year to score the final touchdown of the season. They finished 5-13, so a very impressive finish for them in the end, although it's going to cost them dearly in terms of position the draft. Similarly, like Columbus, this team was 36 in scoring, so they did not score a lot of points. They were 27th in yards, so they were definitely a lot better than Columbus. But here's where they were dramatically better. They were 16th in rush offense, whereas Columbus was 40th. They averaged 120 yards a game on the ground, but they were 28th on the pass, so that was definitely not very good. On defense, they were 28th against yards, so they allowed a shit ton of yards too. But here's where it gets really, really weird. They were 15th in yards allowed, so this defense allowed so many points, but not so many yards in comparison. And then when you get to run defense, this team had the second best run defense in the league. They allowed just 96.7 yards a game. The second best run defense in the league on this shitty team. How is that even possible? Especially with all those points. But then when you get the pass, they were 27, so that's definitely not good. So that defense is just really, really, really weird, and I can't quite figure out what the hell causes. I mean, if a team that allowed that few yards, and most certainly that few rushing yards, this team should have won a couple of those games that they lost by. This is no way a defense that should have a team go 5-13 against. So let's look at the quarterback stats now. Their starter for the year was Robert Robertson, and oh my god, he was terrible. He started the first 5 games. He had under a 50% completion percentage. That's god-awful. Just 3 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. So then his backup, Walter Morgan, came in as the starter. He completed in total over 20%. He completed over 62% of his passes, had over 2,400 yards, 12 touchdowns, 7 picks, so he did much better until he went down. And Robert Robertson had to start a game winner at Seattle, and he went down on the very first play, so then they had to go to their backups and all other shit. They had to sign a free agency who themselves were not very good in the amount of time they had to play against. So this team definitely has a major quarterback problem they have to fix next year. And with that 5th overall pick, they just might be able to fix it right there. On the running game, their leading runner was Quentin Peterson, their 2nd overall pick ever. He got over 1,100 yards, and he got 10 touchdowns. So we had a nice, solid production from him. And right behind him was Jose Bolt, who had over 800 yards a game, and he didn't even start once, and he got 5 touchdowns. So they got pretty decent production from their running game. John Griffin was their leading receiver, although he only made 64 catches, he had almost 1,500 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns, so he was very explosive. And right behind him was David Hurd, who had almost 1,000 yards himself and only 2 touchdowns, though, so he's got a really fixed stat. That offensive line is kind of patchy, so they're going to have to really fix that into next season. And then when you get to defense, oh my God, they had 4 tacklers with over 100 tacklers. And first it was their linebacker David McKee with 153 tackles. Their other linebacker Adolph Lewis with 123. Their strong safety Charles Light with 119. And their free safety Warren Carmona with 109. So they do have a lot of good tacklers for that defense. They didn't get a lot of sacks, but they had, looks like, over 12 different players that got sacked. And their leading sacker was Ronnie Bellamy with 12 sacks. But then when you get over to interceptions, not very good at all. They didn't even get 10 interceptions. That is very bad. So they have a defense that gets only solid, mediocre pressure and no turnovers. They definitely going to have to fix that. In terms of highlights, the only thing I could say it's really a highlight is that 4-1 finish, because that was pretty impressive. And that second best run defense in the league, that's very good, but the question is, are they going to maintain that into next year? And if they're going to fix up any patch on that defense to make that second best run defense very useful. And of course, the lowlights, of course, man, starting off 0-7 and finishing at 1.1-12, you definitely are a shitty team, and you are a shitty team overall. And with that 5th overall pick, unlike teams before him, they have a bunch of quarterbacks up available to pick. And will they do is the question. And along with, they got to fix that offensive line, and they got to get some better pressure on that defense. So overall, I'm not sure what direction the Cincinnati Colts are going to go. We're going to have to wait and see. Now up is another team that really disappointed this year, and that was the Buffalo Sabres. This team was really, really weird. They went 1-8 at home and 8-1 on the road. They were almost undefeated on the road, but could not win at all at home, pretty much. They were pretty, like around the middle of the pack for the entire season. They were 5-3, I believe, at one point. Then they collapsed all the way down to 7-9, but then they had to do 2 incredible come-from-behind victories to finish 9-9, including the final game of the year when they were at Pittsburgh, who needed to win to clinch home field advantage throughout the Century Conference playoffs. They had a 21-point lead, and they allowed Buffalo to come back to tie up the game and then win it overtime. What an epic disaster that was. I thought the Buffalo Sabres were going to make the playoffs because they were like one of the best teams going into the season, but they collapsed at 9-9. So we look at the stats. They were 21st in scoring, so they're in the top of the bottom half of the league in terms of scoring. That's not really good. 35th in yards. That's not good. 33rd in yards, rushing yards, and 33rd in passing. So as you can see, they're not really good on offense. But on defense, they were 37th in scoring defense, 36th against the in terms of yards, 27th against the run, and 33rd against the pass. So overall, this was a really bad team. That honestly, the way they played, this should be like a top 5 pick team. They should not be 9-9. They should have a losing record. But they've had games where they had to do come-from-behind victories. And speaking of which, I'll get to them a little later on the highlights. Their quarterback, Ricky Bale, was very inconsistent, but he had a 62 completion percentage, threw for almost 3,700 yards, 29 touchdowns, and 15 picks. But he, like I said earlier, he was very inconsistent. Then you get in terms of running, they weren't pretty good in that either. Their leading runner, Daniel Robinson, had under 1,100 yards and just 5 touchdowns. And right behind him was Raymond Burton, who had over 500 yards and just 1 touchdown. Their leading receiver was Kerry Grimes, who had almost 1,200 yards, had 91 receptions, but he did have 12 touchdowns, so he got a lot of touchdowns. And right behind him was Ariel Santiago, who had 83 receptions, almost 900 yards, and 8 touchdowns. They had a very good offensive line, one of the best in the league. Leading tackler was James Ferris, their linebacker, with 131 tackles. Right behind him was Nathaniel Parker with 105 tackles, and free safety Mitchell Stewart with 102 tackles. Then you get to sacks, and they did not get a lot of sacks at all, very few. Their strong safety leads Nathaniel Parker leads the team with 4 sacks. You know you're really bad when your safety leads in sacks and it's only 4. But in interceptions, again, not really a lot. Well, actually, they got a good amount, but not really a lot of good. Actually, they got pretty good interceptions. Wayne Lumpsford, their cornerback, leads with 5. And right behind him is their other quarterback, Charles Lacey, with 5 as well. So they're right up there with interceptions, but this team overall is terrible. Oh boy, in terms of highlights, I don't know what to say. I mean, they did a comeback against Baltimore in week 8. They did that they were down 21-3 against Milwaukee, and they pulled off a 15-point comeback to win. Actually, it was a 22-point comeback to beat Milwaukee. They beat San Francisco in a wild shootout in Santa Clara, and then they had those 2 incredible back-to-back comeback from behind victories against Manhattan and Pittsburgh to end the season. But overall, this team is not good. This team is like a mask. They went 9-9, but they're overall a terrible team that honestly got very lucky with a couple of those wins that if they should not have won and probably should have been exactly where they were. So I don't think this team's going to improve at all next year, and I think they're going to regress mightily in 2017. Well, now we get to another very, very, very surprising team this year that was considered one of the worst teams going into the year, but ended up being one of the best teams going into 2017, and that was the Baltimore Charm. Check this out. They started off 3-0. Then they were 6-1, and then they swarmed up to a 10-2 start. They stumbled very badly with 2 straight losses, but they rebounded back to 13-4 with needing one more win to secure, well, not secure, but possibly secure the Century East and maybe a first-round bye and home field advance, perhaps. But nope, they shit the bed against Orlando the end of the week to officially make them a wild card team. They then dominated New Orleans in the wild card round in the biggest PFA playoff lopsided victory ever. Look at the stats; it's unbelievable. It's hard to believe the score wasn't even more obvious. But then after that, they went to Chicago. They took I think it was a 13-3 lead, only to completely blow it and lose 20-13. Man, a whole lot of things went right for this team this year. Let's take a look on offense. They were 12th in score, and that's incredible. Matter of fact, they scored even more points than the division winner Pittsburgh did. They were 13th in yards. They were 36th in rushing yards, so that's very bad. They got to fix that. But they were the second best passing offense in the league. They averaged almost 260 yards a game in the air. Then on defense, 5th in score, and that's incredible. 10th in yards allowed. 18th against the run, so that's not really good for this good defense, but 14th against the pass, which is pretty solid. So this team had a pretty strong offense and a really good defense, and all around a very good team that could contend for the PFA Bowl next year. Their starting quarterback, Andrew Lassiter, who missed 2 games due to injury, week 2 and 3, ended up having almost a 65 completion percentage, almost 4,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 10 picks. And his backup, Joseph McKeever, who started 2 games, he had a completion percentage of, only 55%, but he did have 5 touchdowns to just 3 picks. So at least looks like they have at least a solid backup, because Andrew Lassiter, if he's going to take the next step, he's got to stay healthy for the entire season. Their running back, Raymond Mackey, didn't even make 1,000 yards running. That's definitely not good. But he did get 7 touchdowns, so he had solid work there. And his backup, James Johnson, had 708 yards for 8 touchdowns, so they did get a good amount of touchdowns on the ground. But then you look at this. Their leading receiver, Ariel Leary, who might be number 1 or number 2 leader in yards, he got almost 1,900 yards, and that's just from 80 catches. That is incredible. And 13 touchdowns. What an incredible year he had. And right behind him was Timothy Dawson, who had almost 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns. So this receiving core is unbelievable. This team had a very good offensive line. And their defense in terms of tackling, their number 1 ever pick, Juan Pike, probably one of the best strong safeties in the league, had 105 tackles, which leads the league. And right behind him was their linebacker, Curtis Dick, who had 104 tackles. But then when you get to sacks, this was a sack-happy team. But most of it was spread around, so there was not one player got a whole bunch of sacks. With their leading sacker, Stephen Briggs, with 10. But then you get to interceptions. Oh, this team got a lot of interceptions. And their leader was Max Shea, their free safety, who got 4 interceptions. And Juan Pike was not right that far behind with 2. I mean, there's really not that much highlights to say, except they were a very bad team going into the season, just like the Atlanta Trojans, that somehow turned around and went 13-5, the best wild card team ever so far, and made it deep into the divisional round. So they had a very good season there. The only low light would be, man, that 2 straight weeks where they lost to El Paso and then to Pittsburgh, that really came back to haunt them. Losing to Orlando in the last week of the season, that was disastrous. But I forgot another highlight too, was that dominant, best ever playoff game in PFA history against New Orleans. You guys need to watch that game. That was incredible. But I think this team, I don't know if it'll regress or progress, but if they get all their things right next year, this team will be a major contender for PFA Bowl 2. Alright, then we get to the final team, and that is the division winner, the Pittsburgh Blitz. First, their season started off with that tough loss against Dallas where they could not get any offense going at all. But then they start turning it around and swarmed to a 6-1 start to the year. They had an incredible start to the year. But then they lost 2 very ugly games. They lost to Oakland 16-15, a team that was 1-6 and was clearly no match against Pittsburgh. And they just let them go in and scored a game-win field goal. That was disastrous. And then the next week, too, they hosted San Diego, who they destroyed at their place 38-16, and let them come in and stomp you 30-14? Yeah, that was a terrible finish. They beat Buffalo that next week, only to lose to Baltimore at their place. But they turned around after falling to 7-4 to get all the way up to 13-4. The division was clinched. First round bye was clinched. And if a win against Buffalo, they have a very good shot to clinch home field advantage throughout the playoffs. And they swarmed to a 21-0 lead, only to shit the bed, let Buffalo tie it up, and then Buffalo would win the game in overtime. What a disastrous finish that was. But they still had the home second seed in the playoffs. So after they bye, they hosted San Diego. They decided to go with Billy White, their backup, as the quarterback instead of Cruz Tolbert, who's been terrible pretty much the entire year. They won that game in a close one. Then they go to Chicago for the Century Conference Championship. And it was a slugfest, but Chicago would pull off the victory, ending Pittsburgh's season. This team was 20th in scoring, so they were the bottom of the top half. They were 29th in yards, so they did not get a lot of yards. They were 7th in rushing yards, so they had a very good running game. But 37th in passing, just barely getting 200 yards a game. So that's why I was saying about Cruz Tolbert and Billy White earlier. But then you get to defense. They were the 3rd best scoring defense in the league, allowing just 281 points a game. 4th best defense in yards allowed. They had the number 1 run defense in the league, allowing 89 yards a game, just right behind Cincinnati, which is incredible. And then the 18th most pass defense. So that defense was very good stopping the run and very good stopping scoring, but that offense had a lot of problems. Then we get to the controversial part of the team, the quarterback play. Their starter for most of the season with 14 starts was Cruz Tolbert. He had a completion percentage of 61.1. He threw for under 2,500 yards. 18 touchdowns, but 14 picks, with a QB rating of 77, so that's not good. But his backup, Billy White, who started 4 games, had a completion percentage of almost 66%, also almost 2/3, but 1,100 yards, 7 touchdowns, but 6 picks. So they did not throw a lot of touchdowns, and they most certainly threw too many picks in comparison. So they had bad quarterback play throughout the season. In the rushing department, Frederick Robinson, their running back, had over 1,100 yards, but 5 touchdowns. And right behind him, his backup, George Humphrey, had under 800 yards, but he had 8 touchdowns, so he was productive there. Their leading receiver, Gary Berry, had over 1,550 yards and 14 touchdowns, having a huge lead just right behind Douglas Donahue, who missed 2 games to injury, had 700 yards and just 1 touchdown. So they have a very good stud receiver, But the problem is they only have one apparently. They need to have more if they have any shot that we get this offense going. They also had a very strong offensive line, but one problem is that a lot of them had injuries too. So they had injury bug affect their offensive line performance, although they were still very good. Their lead and tackler was their strong safety Brendan Renfro, who had 114 tackles and 7 sacks. That's from a strong safety, which is incredible. And Lonnie O'Keefe, their cornerback, was right behind with 105. But then you get to sacks, and oh boy, this team by just 1 sack was the number 1 sack defense of all time right now. They had 67 sacks in total, and their leader, who I think was third most of all time right now, is Charlie Weber, their defensive end, who had 17. And right behind him is his fellow defensive end, Sylvester Napier, with 13. And oh boy, their defensive tackle, William Harris, also got into the action with 9 sacks as well. What a sack-happy team this was. But believe it or not, despite all those sacks, this team did not get that many interceptions, just 14, with their free safety, Larry Pineda, getting the most with 6. So this team got a lot of sacks, but not a lot of turnovers off it, which is very, very odd. Don't know about any highlights, but lowlights. Oh man, those 2 devastating losses. That 1 week one stretch where they went 1-3, that really came back to bite them in the ass. But of course, that biggest disappointment was losing to Buffalo when they had a 21-point lead and they allowed Buffalo to win 24-zip in the final half of the overtime. So that was really bad. And that quarterback play came to really haunt them in the playoffs too and throughout the entire season. So this team, just like Baltimore, is a major PFA Bowl contender. But they got a lot of holes to fix, unlike Baltimore, if they want to have any shot to win it. And this is a very big risk. I don't know if they're going to do it or not, but they might try it. Because they have a really high pick, way too high to draft a quarterback. But maybe they'll do something to get a higher pick. Maybe make a big trade. Or maybe sign a player off of free agency. Or maybe they even trade for someone else's backup or someone to replace Billy White or Cruz Tober, because that's going to be a major factor if they're going to make any shot win the PFA Bowl. They have to get a better QB. Well, that officially marks the end of my recap of the Century East. In the next video will be the Century West, which includes the PFA Bowl runner-up, the Chicago 71ers. Oh boy, I can't wait to talk about that conference, that division, because I got so much to talk about.